Rosh HaShanah, it's designed as a time to have a stop and to look back at where we were last year, where we are now, and then ultimately it challenges us with the question of where do we want to go? And usually at this time of year, most Rosh Hashanahs, that question, it's a very individual one. I mean, sure, we come together, we speak in the first common plural, we say al chet shechatanu lefanecha, for the sin that we have committed against you. But usually it's this really deep personal time of looking back at who we were in the last year. What happened to me? Where do I need to change? But this year, those questions, they're not individual, they're communal. This year, the question is about us as a Jewish people, both the Jewish people here in America and the Jewish people in Israel. This year, we've gone through a lot. And the world as we know it today, it's radically different than when we sat together on the evening of September 15th, 2023. That was last Rosh HaShanah, last Erev Rosh HaShanah. We were 3 weeks from October 7th. By 2023, the Jewish community felt completely at home in America. And it's not something which happened overnight. It was the result of a transformation that we went through. And there was a split from the Jews who had been born before World War II and those that were born after World War II. Now, for those that were born before and came of age in the first decade after the war, the Jews, they tiptoed around America, testing the ground as if it was like a new lake and there was ice, and seeing how hard could they step. And by the 1950s, we were whispering, I'm Jewish. Ralph Lifshitz, who was born in 1939 and attended the Manhattan Talmudical Academy, he knew his name identified him as a Jew. And that needed to be left behind if he was going to join mainstream America. So Ralph Lifshitz became Ralph Lauren. Alan Koenigsberg, born in 1935, became Woody Allen. And Melvin Kaminsky, born in 1926, became Mel Brooks. Now, however, as they tiptoed across this country, they began to notice that the ice wasn't thin. It wasn't even ice. It was land. And it was a new land that they were not only safe on, but they were home. Unlike any other home we had seen in 2,000 years. What's been different for us in America versus in Germany or in Spain in the 1400s was that we found a nation that spoke directly to our core Jewish values of pluralism. One of my teachers in Jerusalem taught that pluralism has been at the core of our Judaism since the beginning in the book of Numbers. When Balaam is uncontrollably blessing Israel, he says, Am levadad yishkan. This is a people that dwells apart. Now, since it's a blessing, dwells apart is the right translation, because in this context, as it was meant to be understood, it's saying that the Jewish people who live with other people who are their neighbors. The reason that the Jewish people are distinct is because of the other nations that we get to live among. Now this right here, this is a foundational idea in Judaism. You need others to be distinct. That is pluralism. That is diversity. It's not that the Jewish people are better and that the only way to exist is through homogeny. The blessing can only be found if you have pluralism with other nations and with other neighbors around you. It's why one of the most important forerunners to the Zionist movement, Emma Lazarus, wrote those words that are still on the Statue of Liberty to this day about the ingathering of all of the nations to this nation. Franklin Foer wrote about this in his article in The Atlantic, stating that our core values of raising up all nations, not just our own, it was found in America in a profound way. Louis Brandeis, the first Jewish justice on the Supreme Court, envisioned a bolder and broader interpretation of civil rights. Lillian Wald and Henry Moskowitz co-founded the NAACP, believing that all minorities deserved the same protections. Indeed, pluralism is a deep-held belief found inside the Torah, and it was applied in this new land where Jews dwelled. Now, the Jewish people were integral partners in building up of all of society, not just Jewish society. The unspoken thought was that if we build a society for all, it's going to benefit all of us. And if something bad befalls the Jews, our allies will stand with us, because if they're stronger, we're all stronger. And so we came to realize that America, it was not a stopping point along our 2,000-year journey of exile, but America was actually home. And the whisper of, I'm Jewish, it began growing louder and louder to, I am Jewish. And by 1946, Steven Spielberg was born, and he came of age in show business in the 60s and the 70s, and his name did not change. 1966, Adam Sandler was born as Adam Sandler, Sarah Silverman in 1970. And by 2000, the Orthodox Jew Joseph Lieberman missed becoming vice president by 537 votes. Now, it's not that there were no hints of anti-Semitism. We saw anti-Semitism rising year over year in the past decade. And while researchers were seeing this trend increase, there was nothing that prepared us for October 7th. Groups that the Jewish community had worked with shoulder to shoulder were nowhere to be found. Just this week, yesterday, on the week anniversary of October 7th, Ta-Nehisi Coates released a book. And he was interviewed in New York Magazine. And he's musing in the interview that he doesn't know. Maybe he would have joined Hamas on October 7th. Well, there had always been anti-Semitism on the far right. When we saw people marching in Charlottesville chanting, "The Jews will not replace us," we didn't like it, but we weren't surprised. But the appearance of anti-Semitism on the far left, it was shocking for many of us. When the president of Harvard was asked if it's considered bullying or harassment if a person calls for the genocide of Jews, and she responded, "Depends on the context." I mean, oy vey. And as more and more details came out about October 7th, the silence from former allies, it was deafening. And I was reminded of a quote from Martin Luther King. He said, "In the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends." And those words from the Torah, they began to sound different than they were intended. In the blessing, Am Levadad Yishkan, the Jewish people dwells alone rather than dwells apart. And they began to feel like a curse. And in the past year, some of our reactions, it's been to retreat and to go from loudly saying, "I am Jewish," to coming up to me and whispering, "Rabbi, should I take down my mezuzah?" Where we are today is totally different than where we were a year ago. And then as I look away from us, American Jews, towards my Israeli brothers and sisters in the East, they too are in a totally different reality than they were on Erev Rosh HaShanah 2023. Now, to be clear, things were not great in Israel a year ago. A year ago, the far right-wing government of Netanyahu and Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, it was tearing at the soul of Israel. Things were terrible in Palestine. The settlers' behavior was abhorrent, and they were not being held accountable. In Israel, there were protests in the street opposing the judicial reforms that would have gotten rid of any checks and balances on the Knesset. And in the summer of 2023, the Israel Democracy Institute revealed that over 2/3 of Israelis believed that their country was in a state of emergency. And that's months before October 7th. The trust in the government, it was incredibly low. But what had not changed was that Israelis trusted the military to keep them safe. Just as American Jews, we knew who we were in America, Israelis also had a vision of who they were. Yehuda Kurtzer talks about how Israel was our answer to 2,000 years of oppression and being killed just for being Jews. Now, Israelis would no longer be victims whose only response would be to say the Kaddish, pack your bags, and flee to the next land. Israel changed Jewish history in 1948. We had exited Jewish history. But after October 7th, 2/3 of Israelis no longer felt physically safe in Israel. Kurtzer points out that when you have an established vocabulary based upon your history to describe your reality, you quickly realize that you are still living in it. When the only words to describe your current circumstance are the same words of that millennial-old story, when we say October 7th was a pogrom, when we say October 7th, the most number of Jews killed in a single day since the Holocaust. You see, Anne Frank hid in the walls. The people at Kibbutz Be'eri, they hid in their bomb shelter. And no military came to save either one of them. October 7th, it placed us right back within our pre-1948 history. And then for days and for weeks, as Israel tried to understand what had happened and where the failures were, this sense of safety and feeling that they were enveloped by the IDF, it vanished like when fog burns off in the morning, and it's like it was never there. When I was in Israel this summer, a drone flew in from Yemen, unannounced, no warning, and it crashed into a high-rise in Tel Aviv, and it blew up. And the reaction among Israelis was striking, because there was no reaction. No uproar that they were not warned. No uproar that they were not protected. Just a shrug of the shoulders, as if this was their new reality. That at any moment, any country as far away as Yemen, it could penetrate to the very heart of Israel. Where Israel is today is totally different than where it was a year ago. And the traumas of the last year, they've changed the Jewish people. The Israelis' reaction has been to take that line out of the Torah of Am levadad yishkan as a statement of fact, that the only way to survive is to be a people who dwells alone, with no neighbors, but alone, only relying on themselves to survive. Because you have Gaza to the south, you have Lebanon and Hezbollah to the north, you have Iran on the east feeding both of these parties and now launching ballistic missiles at Israel. And American Jews have reacted to this moment by shrinking and getting quieter, and at times hiding that we're Jewish. And our reaction to these moments are totally normal. I mean, it's normal for us American Jews to shrink and to think about taking down our mezuzahs, to be quiet about being a person who believes that Israel has a right to exist. In other words, that you're a Zionist, one who believes in the development and the protection of a Jewish nation. Our instinct is to tread lightly on social media with our non-Jewish friends and to whisper, I'm a Jew. And then it's normal for many Israelis to no longer see a path towards coexistence with their neighbors. Because when you don't feel safe, it's hard to imagine opening up and taking another risk. All of this, it's normal. And both of these reactions, they need to be challenged. You see, confronting ourselves, it's part of Rosh HaShanah. It's not only when we reflect on who we were, who we are, and who we want to be. We must be courageous enough for tochacha, for rebuke, of looking at where we've gone astray, how we need to change, and how we need to act in the coming year. Both Jews here in America and the Jews in Israel have work that we need to do. And what's amazing is that the work that we need to do and who we need to model ourselves after are from each other. At Hartman, one of my teachers pointed out that the Israelis, they need to learn from the Americans. And the Americans, we need to learn from the Israelis. Israelis need to learn to be more like us American Jews. Am Levadad Yishkan is a blessing, and it's the core of who we are because it's about pluralism. It's about raising up those who we live with. It's why the Jewish people were part of the founding of the NAACP. It's why we so proudly stood, and we continue to stand, for racial justice, LGBTQ rights, refugees, and I could go on and on and on, because it's not about what's just good for me. It's about common core values. Judaism is about caring for the Palestinian victim as well as ourselves. In order for there to be a strong, safe, secure, democratic Israel, there must be a safe, secure Palestine. Now, while this view of a two-state solution, it can seem quaint and out of touch with reality, and things are getting more complicated by the hour, it's foundational to how Judaism has viewed the world since the time of the Torah. And I know many of my Israeli friends, even those on the far left side of the spectrum, members of Meretz, they can no longer imagine such a thing. Because how could that be safe for their families? At the end of the first service, I had 3 Israelis come up who just left the army. Furious. And they said they can't imagine it. The IDF just discovered tunnels in the West Bank a few weeks ago. And I want to be clear. I'm not saying I know how to get to a place where Palestine and Israel is living in peace and security side by side. What I am saying is that if we do not dream it, it's never going to come to be. And I know it can seem far away. And many of us, we can't even imagine it in our own lifetimes. But that has never, ever, ever stopped us. You see, when Theodor Herzl got up and he talked about the dream of having a modern state of Israel, he did it in Switzerland in 1897. And he was certain on that day, that he had founded Israel. And it was not something that he saw in his lifetime. Much of what we do and much of what we dream about, it's not about us or our lifetimes, but what's good for the world and beyond us. And now for us. All we need to do is to look east at our Israeli family members. If our beating heart in American Judaism has been about tikkun olam and lifting others up, as it should be, does that mean when we're down, we're not able to lift ourselves up? Our Judaism, it's about caring for the vulnerable and for Palestinian victims. And our Judaism is about us. We must demand for the rights of others, and we must learn how to stand up for our own rights. Historically, when the winds of anti-Semitism kick up, our reaction is to become quiet and to hide and to whisper. In Germany, there was a saying that Jews tried to become more German than the Germans. Historically, Jews thought they could hide, or they could assimilate, or they could just blend in as white people. When you hide, you lie down. And when you lie down, you will get stepped on. What we can learn from Israelis is not to lie down, but to take up space. And we know this. The most significant social movements that have radically altered the shape of America have been by being loud and not hiding. The Jewish gay activist, Harvey Milk, he said, every gay person must come out. As difficult it is, you must tell your immediate family, you must tell your friends, if indeed they are your friends. You must tell your neighbors, you must tell the people you work with. And once they realize that we are indeed everywhere, Every myth, every lie, every innuendo will be destroyed once and for all. And so we have to ask ourselves, would gay marriage have happened in America if milk had stayed quiet? This is not the time for us to be silent. This is not the time for us to take our mezuzahs off the door or to tuck our Magen David necklaces beneath our shirts. Hiding is anti-American. America's big idea is celebrating difference. It doesn't just tolerate difference, it embraces difference as the source of our nation's vibrancy. You see, it's only in America that the hyphen is celebrated. Jewish American, African American, Italian American, Irish American. Anti-Semitism is anti-American. So when anti-Semitism training is canceled by the San Francisco Unified School District, we will fight against that. God knows if SFUSD canceled a training on racism, I would expect every single one of us to be on the front line of that fight. We must fight for our distinctiveness. If Jews are blocked on campus like they were at Berkeley, it's our Jewish and our American obligation to fight against that. The way that we're going to change the city, the way that we are going to change the country, it's not by going it alone, but by doing it as part of a collective. And so many congregants in our community, they have shown up. They've not been silent. Our teens at Emanu-El are wearing more Magen David necklaces on the outside of their shirt than at any time in my 20 years here at Emanu-El. That is not hiding. That is showing up. Our parents, who are looking their kids' teachers in the eyes and saying, what you're doing is making my child feel unsafe, that is taking up space and ensuring their voices are heard. Our members who have not let up calling their elected representatives, they're not staying silent. So whatever we're doing, we need to do more, and we need to be bigger, and we need to be louder. This Rosh HaShanah, it's radically different from where we were a year ago. Never before have we had the opportunity in our lifetimes to live out our pluralistic Jewish values in the public sphere as we do this year. We know how the story ends if we hide and if we don't take up space. Tomorrow, we're going to gather at Baker Beach, overlooking the Pacific Ocean and the Golden Gate Bridge, designed by one of our members. And as you toss your pebbles or your bread into the water, and you're counting how you need to change, please know, this Rosh Hashanah, it's not about you alone. This Rosh Hashanah in this year, it's about us. It's about the Jewish people. It's about the future. So whatever you're going to do with your life this year, for us, for the world, don't do it quietly. So let each one of us in this room tonight commit that our voice is going to be loud. Our voice is going to be strong, and our voice will be a tool for change.